I think you eventually reach a place as an anime fan where you finally feel like you get anime. It may seem impossible if you're just starting out, but we all eventually leave our rookie phase and with enough time start to become accustomed and a little numb to the many tropes and genres that make this medium what it is. Eventually, you do so much research on everything that things start to feel a little less new and more like a repeat of what you've seen a million times over. You could always just double down on your favorite genres and become a bit of a junkie, but I much prefer to spice up my anime experience with a little assistance. Alternatively, instead of just rotting on the vine, you can instead choose to jump into the vast catalog of forgotten backlog shows out there and do so with that same degree of non-existent expectations that you did way back when you were just a tyke. Whether the shows are good or bad doesn't really matter as much as the fact that you will always be having fun. And to that end, I've brought back the random anime generator, give 3 series for me to watch free of bloated expectations, and determine if they're good enough to see to completion by the end of the 3 episodes. No limits on genre, age, or quality to be found here, so we can fully embrace whatever slop finds its way out onto our plate this month. It's all part of a balanced breakfast.
背景ありきたりな日常ドラマのワンシーンに変わったあの日から
Of all genres out there, I think boys' love might just be the most underserved. The genre has a storied history and quite the loyal fanbase among the straight women that consume it, but it very rarely seems to bubble up into the broader zeitgeist. As a straight guy who could not be farther from the target demographic, I can think of a couple reasons why the genre seems to attract less attention than its female counterpart. The biggest might just be that they're not all that good. I mean, you've got Given and Dokusei, which are pretty solid in their own right. Go beyond that, and there is a very steep decrease in quality. God, I'm so out of my element with this one. Released in 2024, Cherry Magic, 30 Years of Virginity Can Make You a Wizard, takes that one internet meme from a while back and says, what if we made a whole series out of it? Apparently the meme has roots on Japanese forums at the turn of the century, and was meant to disincentivize youths from having sex too young. Not exactly what the series is going for, but so be it. Cherry Magic follows Kiyoshi Adachi, a young office worker who just turned 30 and has developed the magic ability to read the mind of anyone who happens to touch him. Through his newfound wizard powers, Kiyoshi learns that his co-worker, Yuichi Kurosawa, has developed the hots for him, and the series follows the development of their relationship from there. Cherry Magic is remarkably okay. It certainly knows how to play its romance right, which is a bit of an oddity for a genre that is notorious for the sheer volume of smut within it. The writing knows how to hit that sweet spot with its more intimate moments, balancing decent effects work and a solid score to really sell these scenes. The pacing in general gives us plenty of room to breathe, allowing the romance to develop without really ever feeling like it's being forced for the sake of progress, which is a common shortcoming of a lot of romances, straight or not. The leads have decent chemistry and work off of one another well enough to sell their relationship, and the plot doesn't rely too heavily on conveniences to move things forward. Certainly not a flashy romance, but it seems to mostly get the job done as it needs to. That's pretty good for the show too, since the rest of the production doesn't fare quite as well. You can get a pretty good sense of it from the clips I've been showing, but the art isn't exactly the best. A lot of the animation is fairly flat and the colors muted and dull. The boards aren't a whole lot better, leading to very plain presentation that's not going to swing anyone who isn't already hooked on the romance itself. As for that romance, while the show is good at selling it, it's less competent at presenting us with particularly interesting characters. Kiyoshi is your typical sub-archetype, but doesn't present a whole lot of character traits outside of his turbo virgin wizardry, and Yuichi is somehow worse. He does get a bit of time for himself in episode 3, but it's hard not to read his actions as a little creepy. He's an office worker lusting for his inferior and is not particularly subtle about it. The series' gimmick of hearing other people's voices doesn't help, as his more lustful desires feel incredibly out of place in a workplace setting, especially when you consider that Kiyoshi doesn't really give much indication that he himself is exactly open to it. The whole dynamic of the show really hinges on you buying into that romance, but even with that, the extremely basic presentation feels like something you'd really only get something out of if you're more of a romance junkie and not looking for something a little heartier from the genre. Don't get me wrong, that's a pretty sizable audience, but I'm not sure how interested the many lonely straight dudes who watch romance anime are on the love between two guys. Hell, I'm not even sure how interested I am in watching a pretty middle-of-the-road romance between two guys. And it isn't even June. I have a certain appreciation for how batshit insane anime can get. I know I've said it many times before, but you do have to appreciate just how often anime takes the wildest ideas out there and can somehow make it work in a convincing fashion. Alternatively, plenty of series just throw shit at a non-stick wall, and the result is interesting. I do hold that it's better to be an interesting mess than completely uninspired, but Lord knows some series really try to push that. Concrete Revolutio is the 2015 brainchild of Neo-Ranga creator Sho Aikawa and Full Metal Alchemist director Seiji Mizushima. The story takes place in a world where superhumans of all types exist, with constant conflict arising between the heroes and villains of the world. Our story centers on one Jiro Hideyoshi. Jiro is a member of the Overpopulation Research Laboratory, also known as the Superhuman Bureau. The Bureau is an arm of the Ministry of Health and Welfare, whose job it is to protect the identities and well-beings of all superhumans, whether good or evil. After a mission goes slightly sideways, Jiro meets the superhuman Kiko Hoshino, whose reality-warping powers prove quite handy to Jiro, so the two join forces in Jiro's mission to protect the superhuman world. At least, that's what I got from the show. Concrete Revolutio is one of those shows that's just all over the place. The character designs are all pretty fun, if a bit discordant at times, and the plot seems to throw as much as it can at you, though never quite feeling too disorienting. Kiko and Jiro make for a fun pair of main characters, and the surprising amount of complex politics at the heart of the story keeps things interesting and at least somewhat holding its world together. The animation and art direction are also quite lively and give these series some spunk that you rarely seem to get. For better or worse, there seems to have been quite a few shows like this that got released across the mid-2010s, and I don't necessarily hate it. This kind of a mile-a-minute storytelling is prone to problems, though. The show sets up a lot, but by throwing a seemingly never-ending list of characters and ideas at you, it makes itself prone to eventually jumping the shark and getting way too bogged down in all the details. The caliber of dialogue, while not terrible, feels like it's taking itself quite seriously, and a show that extensively does not feel like it wants to be. Besides a couple of more annoying cast and color vomit on the screen, can't say anything stood out too negatively about Concrete Revolutio, but 2 seasons of this degree of schizo writing just feels like the kind of thing that is quick to completely derail itself and become more of a laughing stock than good time if it doesn't properly rein in its politics. Sure does not seem to be a boring time, but whether it goes in the direction of being god-awful or wholly entertaining is yet to be seen. Inside every original anime there are 2 wolves. The history of vampires is long and kinda complicated. Vampirism exists in some form or another across multiple ancient cultures, dating all the way back to the ancient Sumerians and their own vampiric spirits known as Edimu. Modern scholars attribute the existence of early vampire myths to misunderstandings about death and the process of decomposition, which explains why pretty much everyone seems to have their own version of these creatures. The vampires we know and love originated in southeastern Europe in the 18th century and would take their semi-modern form in the early 19th century. In 1732, the term vampire was first coined to describe a vampire epidemic in Eastern Europe that arose following Austria's acquisition of lands in and around northern Serbia. Now, if there's one thing to know about humans, it's that if something breathes, and sometimes when it doesn't, then someone has almost certainly tried to figure out how to have sex with it, and the ugly abominations that were early vampires were no exception. Somewhere along the line, it seems that vampire mythos started to intertwine with succubus mythos, and the result is an entity that these days feels more known for its sex appeal than being particularly intimidating. Then again, this isn't exactly a modern phenomenon, as poet Heinrich Ossenfelder was exploring the sensual nature of vampires in his short poem The Vampire, which released all the way back in 1748. So maybe we've been cooking from the very beginning. Released in spring 2024, Vampire Dormitory follows the story of Mito Yamamoto. After being orphaned by a tragic fire when she was young, Mito was passed around between relatives until she finished school and was swiftly kicked to the curb. Perpetually homeless, Mito finds herself fired from her latest job for bringing too much attention from swooning fangirls. Desperate for work, she finds her way into a local cafe, where she has her first run-in with a mysterious hot boy named Ruka Saotome. After a further string of unfortunate events, Ruka reveals himself to in fact be a vampire after saving Miko from falling to her death off of a slippery bridge. Taking pity on the girl, Ruka allows her to live with him so long as she continues to let him feed on her blood when he's hungry. Seems like a good deal, if not for the fact that Ruka is actually convinced that Mito is a guy due to her tomboyish nature and dress, and she doesn't really feel in the mood to break the truth to him. And thus begins a story of increasingly bizarre scenarios as Mito tries to protect her secret while attending an all-boys school and living with a hot, sexy vampire. Oh, how steamy. Despite the very Twilight-sounding plot, Vampire Dormitory does have a pretty decent hook to it. The first episode paces itself out pretty well, and bases its narrative in a story of finding out what it means to be loved for the unloved and the coldness of human behavior. It sets a pretty solid reason for Ruka to want Mito to know love, given that it makes her blood taste sweeter, and allows other characters to work their way into the narrative without feeling entirely forced. The best example of this is the brooding Ren Nikaido, who is a classmate of Ruka and Mito's who knows Ruka's secret and is worried that Mito might be in danger being in his company. They work fine enough as characters, and the increasingly wild situations the group finds themselves in does allow for a decent enough comedic backbone, all things considered. My main gripe with Vampire Dormitory, and it is a pretty big one, is that it kinda peaks in episode 1. Once it gets more involved in the meat and potatoes of the romance, it starts to really strain itself. Mito's backstory works, but the leads have little actual chemistry between them as the plot continues to try to make them an item, and a lot of the backstory and themes behind episode 1 are handled with the precision of a sledgehammer. The supporting cast is entirely forgettable, and the animation is overcooked with all sorts of post-processing and filters, obscuring to the best of its ability some pretty underwhelming layouts. It becomes quite apparent that any interesting ideas it had are almost entirely purely in service of setting up its wish fulfillment romance. That's fine if the romance is good, but that's far from what we get in practice, and the whole thing reads more like bargain bin female wish fulfillment than anything meaningfully interesting. I do seem to get a lot of these spit out at me for the show, and I can mercifully say that Mito isn't the worst lead we've seen on this series, nor is the rest of the cast quite that bad, but that's not really much of a compliment either, now is it? One of these days, I'm sure I'll find a reverse harem that's half decent, but until then, I'm not holding my breath. Considering the state of the boys' love genre, Cherry Magic is a lot more competent at times than most, but even with that, wasn't quite able to overcome the task at hand and ends up on the drop list. It's got a decent romantic backbone, but the lackluster presentation and barely above water characters didn't sell the series hard enough to pull it out. I think if you are desperate for some man-on-man action, it will scratch that itch, but if that isn't your thing, then this one won't be either. Concrete Revolutio is a bit of a mess, but a beautiful mess at that, and ends up being the kind of thing I'm totally down to see through to the end. Bones does a great job throughout the show with the animation, especially in action scenes, keeping the show feeling alive. It does, however, feel almost too alive. The plot is quite manic, and while it mostly holds itself together through Season 1, Season 2 just flew a wee bit too close to the sun. It comes crashing down in a rainbow mess that I probably could have done without. If you like absolutely bewildering and psychotic shows, then this is the one for you, but if bright colors give you migraines, I wouldn't fault you for passing it over as well. I had quite the fondness for Vampire Dormitory's first episode, to the point where I was considering giving it a shot, but unfortunately, the back two more or less cemented the show's spot on the dropped list. The character writing is just thinly veiled female romance fantasy, and it becomes painfully obvious through the stiff writing and acting that the show has no interest on actually acting on any of these sometimes interesting things it sets up. Even if it does, I don't feel strongly enough to take that gamble, and so it rather resoundingly finds its home here. With all that said, we do reach the end of yet another video. Definitely a little more out of my area of expertise on this one, but I hope you enjoyed nonetheless. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the series discussed here today, and hit that like and subscribe button if you like what you saw and want to see more videos in this series as they come out. You can also click over the playlist to catch up on episodes in the series that you might have missed, and follow me on the other sites for more content from me. I recently downloaded a drawing software, and have started to post again on the DeviantArt, so you can head over there if you want to see more drawings from me and less videos. Though go watch those too, because they're pretty good. I put a lot of time into these. Regardless, wherever it may be, until we meet again, remember to stay salty.